Let us now move into the subject for today, which is health economics, and I'll be dealing with 4 different subjects: Nestle breast milk, drug legalization, markets and body parts, and the issue of socialized medicine. What's happening with the Nestle breast milk case? Nestle sells a breast milk substitute, powdered milk, a powder. You mix it with water. There are some women who don't lactate, don't give off breast milk, and this is very helpful. Then what happened is Nestle made the marketing disaster of a decision to market this stuff in Africa. And what happened there was horror, because a lot of women, even though their breasts gave off milk, figured this was Western and therefore better. I'm now giving you the view from the critics of Nestle. And they mixed the water, and then they found out that the water was dirty. And by the time that they found this out, their breasts had stopped giving milk, because you stop after a while if you don't breastfeed. And then the babies were either killed or undernourished or what have you. It was just a public relations disaster. Probably from a PR point of view, Nestle never should have done that. But from a libertarian point of view, we have to ask, were they guilty of any invasion or aggression against the non-aggressor for which they should be put in jail in a libertarian Nuremberg trial? And the answer is no. They just sold stuff to consenting adults who were, I don't know, ignorant of the way it worked, even though they had directions there, but the people couldn't read. And then the problem was with the dirty water. So if I were to assign blame here, it would be to the underdeveloped countries. Notice I'm not saying developing countries, because many of them are retrogressing, and I refuse to call them developing just because, you know, hope is the triumph over reality here. The failure was that these countries couldn't provide enough of an educational system to have the people read, and perhaps more importantly, clean water. So instead of blaming Nestle, we should have blamed those countries, but they obviously blamed Nestle because Nestle was capitalist and greedy and seeking profits, whereas they were benevolent but not providing much of anything. Okay, that's the first topic I want to discuss with you under health economics. The next one is drug legalization, drugs such as marijuana or heroin. First, I want to emphasize that the view I espouse doesn't advocate use of these things, rather legalization. And there's a gigantic difference between the use of it and the legalization of it. Actually, I oppose it. I personally, I don't drink alcohol, I don't smoke, I'm sort of a teetotaler type. I think that heroin and marijuana rots your brain, and I think it would be a great idea if no one used these things. But that's not the question. The question is not whether you should use it. The question is, if you use it, should you be put in jail for it? And the libertarian answer is you should only be put in jail for stuff that constitutes an invasion of someone else's personal property. And putting stuff into your own body, however foolishly or not foolishly, it's up to you, simply doesn't constitute an invasive act. So therefore, it should be legalized. One of the problems with prohibition is that you have fly-by-night drug manufacturers who are not hemmed in by market forces. They produce impurities. One of my favorite people, can't even think of his name, Lenny Bruce. One of my favorite people. A comedian, a semi-libertarian, fellow Brooklyn Jew boy, died of not an overdose, but of impurities of this substance. And the people responsible for the drug act, I think, are in effect murderers, because they were in a causal chain and blameworthy, and it led up to his death. The phenomena that I'm discussing is not limited to drugs. It certainly applied to alcohol during the Prohibition of Alcohol. We had Prohibition in the 30s, and perhaps the only good thing about that Prohibition is that it created a whole bunch of great movies. Without it, we wouldn't have had the dramatic effects of these great movies. But here too, you had bathtub gin, and bathtub gin was the economic equivalent of impure heroin or marijuana or whatever the drug is. So it's not limited to drugs. It pervades anything that is prohibited. I mean, if we prohibited chocolate tomorrow, there'd be guys coming to the schoolyard opening up their coat and say, "Hey kid, you want some chocolate?" And the chocolate would not be Hershey's or Nestle's quality. It would be dirty chocolate that would kill you. And the fault of it would not be chocolate, it would be the prohibition of chocolate. We're losing the drug war. We ought to leave it and declare victory and stop. So badly are we losing the war that they can't even control drugs in prisons. And if they can't control drugs in prisons, how are they going to control drugs for free people? Why are they losing the drug war? Is it that they're particularly inept? No, they're no more inept here than they are anywhere else, but in other areas you don't have the following phenomenon, such as in Post Office or Motor Vehicle Bureau or other government bureaus. And the phenomenon is that every time they succeed, they lay the seeds for failure. For example, what's a success in the drug war? A success in the drug war is catching a whole bunch of people with drugs. So here is the supply and the demand for drugs, the quantity and the price. And let's suppose they succeed. Success means there's less supply now out there. Well, notice what happens to the price when you succeed. The price goes up. The price goes up. There are more profits in it. There are more profits in it. People are led as if by an Adam Smith's invisible hand to start producing it. So their very success is a failure. In ancient Rome or Greek mythology, there were two gods fighting, and one god, his mother was the earth, and every time he fell down, she revved him up and he rose up with greater strength. Now if there are two boxers, each one knocking the other one down, and when boxer A gets knocked down, he's weakened. When boxer B gets knocked down, he comes up even stronger. Other things equal, you know who's going to win that war. And it's not boxer A. It's not a victimless crime. Yes, there are children who lose out when their parents are drugged, but if it's legal, you can earn a living as a drug addict. There are stories about there's one group of people that have much more access to legal drugs than any other group, doctors. And there are stories about doctors who are addicted to heroin and lead, normal lives. It's sort of like alcohol, in effect, is my understanding. Although I'm an economist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physical person, but that's my understanding, that you can lead a relatively normal life, and the reason that your life is turned into a horror is not because of the drugs itself, it's because of the prohibition. If we legalized it, the price would come way down. Now, you drug addicts know that the price is very high. It's maybe $1,000 a week or something, and in order to get that amount of money, unless you have a very good job like a doctor or an airline pilot or something like that, you have to commit crimes or prostitute yourselves in the case of women. The thing that creates havoc is the prohibition, not the drugs itself. If the drug cost $5 a week, as much as chewing gum, well, who would have to go out and commit a crime for it? And if it came to you without impurities, no one would die from it. It would be just a medical problem, like beer drinking is now, or wine drinking, or alcohol drinking. I mean, there are people who should, go to Alcoholics Anonymous or something, but it's not a havoc social problem because happily we've legalized it. The one argument against legalization is that the government will then be able to tax it. And as far as I'm concerned, the government already has more money than it needs. It doesn't need this extra money. So I reject that one argument for legalization. And if that was the only thing, I'd favor prohibition. But that's not the only thing. The reason we had the Harrison Narcotics Act of 1917, which started the whole thing, was a racist policy. It was anti-Chinese sentiment. We noticed that the Chinese went to opium dens. So we figured, how can we disaccommodate Chinese people? Aha, let's prohibit opium and other drugs that are similar to that. One argument that people have against legalization is, suppose that right now, under prohibition, we have a supply curve way up here. Here's the demand curve. And let's suppose that the price here is like $1,000 a week for a habit. And let's suppose that if it was legalized, the price would be $5 a week for a habit. There are seats up here if you want to avail yourself of them. So the question is, at $5 a week, how many people would use it? And let's suppose that we're talking not so much quantity, but say percentage of the population that uses it. And let's suppose that right now 2% of the population uses it. I don't know what the numbers are, but just for illustration. So what will the demand curve look like? Will it look like this? Will it be vertical? Namely, at 1,000, 2% of the people use it. At $5, 2% of the people use it. Or will it be like this, where, say, 3% use it, or maybe 5%, or maybe 20%, or maybe 80%? This is a good way to illustrate elasticity for you people who are going to be teaching microeconomics. I mean, if you have to teach elasticity, which is sort of a boring subject, you might as well jazz it up with this sort of a thing. And I find when I take a survey, I ask how many people favor the legalization, and most of them think that the curve is very inelastic. Namely, a big price change will not call forth much of a quantity change. Whereas most of the people that oppose legalization in my classes think that the elasticity is much higher. Namely, a big price drop will call forth a lot more increase in use. So let me give you some arguments in favor of this sort of a thing, namely why you wouldn't expect much more use. One is that necessities have a lower elasticity than luxuries, and drug is a necessity for an addict. Another is that there's no schoolyard hooking or pushing under legalization, no one coming to the schoolyard and trying to get kids. And another is the de facto case in Mexico, where it's legal almost, that they don't stop you, and yet not everyone in Mexico is a drug addict. Indeed, very few people are. Similarly, in Netherlands, there was some legalization, actual legalization, and not many people. It's not like 80% of the people are on drugs. It's more like 2 or 3%, or the same amount as here. Another empirical study came from Great Britain, and there the price, it was legal, the price went down, and there was a big upsurge in youth. But this was a statistical artifact, because what happened is that they undercounted the number of users in the UK. As you can imagine, people don't say, hey, I'm a drug addict, register me or something. And also people came from Australia and India and all over the British dominions to take advantage of this humane policy. So it's not as if new people became drug addicts, it's rather that drug addicts from other countries came there. Okay, so much for the second point. We've done the Nestle's, we've done the drugs. Let's talk a little bit about body parts. The situation with body parts is that under present circumstances, some 60,000 people a year lose their lives because there are no markets in body parts. Given that there are no markets, the supply and demand, price and quantity, the numbers are something like this: 80,000 and 20,000. Namely, there are 80,000 people who need the body parts, and only 20,000 body parts, and I think this is just kidneys. There are many other body parts as well. So some 60...
Worldwide?
Just the U.S. So some 60,000 people die from lack of body parts that presumably would be available if we had a market. People on kidney dialysis machines look forward to Memorial Day and July 4th. Is it because they're particularly patriotic? No. It's because you've had a lot of motor vehicle deaths, especially on motorcycles which are called donor mobiles, because what you want is a kidney not from someone my age but from someone your age, 20 rather than 60. And people who ride motorcycles are 20-year-olds and healthy in every other way. And then they die suddenly and their body parts are available, they're not diseased. So again, one of the benefits is the drama of all sorts of TV shows and movies where, you know, there's this little girl who needs a body part or a heart, otherwise she'll die, and she's on the list, but there's not enough, and now they're hoping that they get one. Or there is one available and it's in a car, but some kidnapper hijacks the car and doesn't realize there's a body part. You get a lot of movies out of that, and this is the only benefit I can see of the policy. Let me take a quick survey. How many of you good people have signed that card on the back of your license plate such that if you die suddenly in a motor vehicle accident, your kidneys and heart and eyeballs and other body parts will go to the hospital, who will then give it to people? Raise your hand if you signed it. I'd say there are maybe 40 people in the room and about 20 people raise their hand, give or take. So we make a supply curve just for this little group. And since the present price is 0 and 20 people signed up, we have a dot on the supply curve. Okay, now you people who raised your hands, don't raise your hands anymore. The other people, how many of you would have signed up if I had given you $100 to sign up? Now remember, to sign this thing doesn't mean you're giving anyone a kidney. It means just if you die in an accident, then we have first dibs on your body parts. How many would sign up for $100?
You don't have a car.
Can't hear you?
You don't have a car.
Doesn't matter. You could be a guest in someone else's car and get smushed. Do I have, are you raising your hand?
Yeah.
Okay. So at $100, we now have 21. So the supply curve moves slightly. How about 500? Anyone going to sign this for 500? Okay, so the supply curve is vertical up to 500. How about 1,000? $1,000 to sign it? I got a few more suckers. I got a few more suckers. I mean holdouts. Okay, so now we're up to about 25 at 1,000. Okay, well, I don't want anyone to be holding out. You know, play the game with me. The point is, you know, that as the price goes up, the supply usually heads in a northeast direction. So you have some sort of supply curve. And then you have a demand curve, which is pretty vertical because, you know, if you need it, you need it. And the idea is that if, you see, this group is unusual in that so many people have signed up. In most groups that I asked this of, very few have signed up. And if they're honest, as I add more money to it, I get more signatures, as I did here, but it was a little truncated. The point is that if it were legal, we'd have many, many more body parts than at a zero price. It's the same thing. I mean, if I said how many would supply these for free, very few. But how many would supply these if they were $10 each? More people would get into the market the higher the price is. So supply curves slope upward, and they slope upward for body parts or pretzels. It doesn't matter. This is a horrific misallocation of resources that all economists, not just Austrians, abhor. Because on the one hand, you have body parts needlessly going into the grave with perfectly good bodies, and somehow they can't get transferred. Because ask yourselves, at what point does the permission have to give it if it's not already given beforehand? And the point is, when the parent is told that their little baby who they diapered and brought up and breastfed and is now 23 and just died, and someone says, well, will you give us his body parts? And the mother is crying. You know, so you can imagine that not too many people are going to give permission then. So you have thousands and thousands of kidneys and hearts and livers and spleens and eyes and blood going into the grave, on the one hand. And on the other hand, you have people on kidney dialysis machines and people who are dying for a lack of a heart and dying for a lack of a liver. And never the twain shall meet, which is a sort of a horror for economists who love to see resources allocated more reasonably. There was a case in Canada where some person had a 4-year-old son who needed a liver, otherwise he would die. So he put an ad in the paper, I'll pay $500,000 for a liver. And they threw him in jail for trying to save his son's life. It's just a horror scenario. Speaking of horror scenarios, one argument against legalization, and what legalization would look like would be, say, it would be $1,000 or something, is that you'd have body snatchers. You know, people, and here you have some movies and TV programs where some guy is lying on a bench and they grab him and put him under and they take his liver and, you know, stick him back on the bench. Well, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. But the argument is that it would happen more if we legalized it, and the economic analysis shows the exact opposite. Because right now we have very few organs. So the real value of the organ is way up here. If we had more organs, such that people weren't dying from the lack of them, the price would be lower. And if we say that the body snatching would be in proportion to the profits that you can make, and the profits that you can make would be in proportion to the prices you can get, there's more body snatching now than there would be under a legal market. So that would be the argument against those people who offer this horror scenario. Let me see if I can get through my stuff, and I'll try to leave some time for questions. And we go from 9 to 10, so at 10 to 10, stop me, and we'll have questions no matter how far I get. Okay, so we've done these three. Not that we've done it thoroughly, but I wanted to cover more than just one area in health economics. So let me now get into socialized medicine, which is the biggie, and I'll have the most to say about that. Now, the people like Hillary Clinton and our other friends on the left who want to have socialized medicine want to bring to the U.S. the system that is responsible for the USSR going belly up, and they want to apply it to medicine. Actually, they want to apply it to everything. They'd like to make the U.S. like the USSR. But we're just talking about socialized medicine for the moment. And the obvious answer is that socialism doesn't work. And their reply is, but medicine is different. Okay, you can't have socialism in cars, you can't have collective farming, fine, we've learned, but medicine is different. And one of the biggest Exhibit A in their argument is that I don't know how many millions of people don't have health care. However, 40 million people don't have health care. 40 million people don't have health care. And they just keep repeating this endlessly as an indictment of the free enterprise system. Well, 300 million people don't have food insurance. Nobody has clothing insurance. Does anyone have homelessness insurance? No. And yet, most people can live for months, if not years, without medical care. And how long can you live without food? Not very long. So medicine isn't, if you have to have insurance and you have to be protected, medicine shouldn't be the first one on the list. It should be food or water or something like that. And yet we don't have insurance there. So where is the disconnect here? The disconnect here is that the reason we really do need protection from medical in a way that we don't need for food, clothing, and shelter is that medical expenses are so bloody high. If medical expenses were cheap, like tuna fish or peanut butter or wristwatches, who would need it? You get sick, you go to the doctor, and a $25 bill, and that's it. And if it's a big, big operation, it's $1,000. Instead, to see a doctor is more like 150 or 200 bucks for 10 minutes. And to get an operation is more like 150,000 if you take into account all the costs. So why is it so bloody expensive? Well, it's so bloody expensive mainly because there are restrictions on entry into the field of medical practice. But before I get into that, I just want to go over some other arguments about this unique business of medicine. And here are some arguments in favor of socialized medicine, that it's somehow immoral to make money off of people's sickness, to take advantage of their ill health. But this is silly because the baker takes advantage of your starvation. The baker is making money out of your need for food. So there's nothing unique about medicine such that it's wrong to make money out of people's needs. That's the way the market works. You always make money out of people's needs. If they didn't have a need for something, you wouldn't be supplying it. Another one is that we shouldn't leave medicine to the tender mercies of capitalism, because capitalism is motivated by greed. But as Adam Smith said, it's not from benevolence that the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker give us their product. It's out of self-interest. Nothing wrong with self-interest, and self-interest could work for food, clothing, and shelter, and movies. It could work for medicine as well. Some people say, well, healthcare is too important to leave to the market. It's okay for rubber bands and paper clips, but for important stuff, you need central planning. But the exact opposite is the truth. If you have to have socialism, let's have it for paper clips and rubber bands, which are relatively unimportant. And for things that are important, we've got to have capitalism because capitalism works. Another thing is, to the extent that we do have insurance, and we do have insurance for housing, for example, when it burns down, nobody has insurance for if a pipe bursts or if the toilet isn't working for a house. In other words, you'll insure it for catastrophic house problems, such as the whole house burns down or gets smushed in a typhoon or something like that. You'll have house insurance for that. Similarly, you'll have insurance for a car. If you crash it and you lose the whole car, or if you hit somebody else, you'll have insurance. You're not going to have insurance for oil changes or for little things like that. And with medicine, it's very different. There you have insurance for a medical checkup, which seems almost silly. Why would you do that? Because it's the equivalent of having insurance like if your window breaks instead of the whole house going. So you have that bifurcation. Another argument saying that medical insurance is needed and we need socialized medicine is they talk about the administrative costs that go on under medicine. And they say under government you wouldn't have administrative costs, which is silly because government is administrative costs par excellence. Okay, here are some problems with socialized medicine. Socialized medicine destroys the price system. The prices are not freely articulated on the basis of markets. And prices are to the economy as road signs and road maps are to the geography. Without a road sign and a road map, you can't get around. Without a price, you can't get around. Another point is the socialist calculation debate. The Austrians have made great contributions into explaining just why the Soviet went belly up, because you didn't have markets in factors of production, so you couldn't assign prices. You would then misallocate resources all over. There was no rational way to plan the economy. Well, so is it true in the case of socialized medicine. You don't know, you can't know whether it's good to hire an extra doctor or install another machine or train another 10 nurses, because the prices are not market prices. if you had market prices, then you could make these decisions in a rational way. Without market prices, you're just sort of, I don't know, throwing dice. Another argument that we have to consider is that medicine is different, because if you don't eat, you die. If you drive badly, you die. But if you don't take care of yourself, we have to pay, because you go to the hospital and you'll be on our ticket and we'll be paying for you. So in a sense, we're all our brother's keepers. But this is not a function of medicine or health. It's a function of socialized medicine in the first place. In other words, if each person were responsible for his own person and there were none of this grabbing of services, then the whole thing wouldn't apply. It would be more like if you ruin your bicycle, you pay for it. Well, you see, this is why you have all this stuff against smoking and stuff against overeating. Because if you smoke or you overeat, you become a medical, a person who needs medical services, and medical services come from other people. And therefore, it's now my business whether you're eating French fries or chocolate, whereas if you're on your own, none of my business. So this is sort of a way of creating all sorts of controversies and violating people's rights. Without socialized medicine, I wouldn't be coming to you and saying, eat healthy and brush your teeth. But after that, I might. 50% of expenses, of medical expenses, are given for people in the last 6 months of their lives. Now, this is something that wouldn't occur but for socialized medicine. It's not the way that people would ordinarily act. But because of the problems of moral hazard, namely when it costs you nothing, you tend to use it as if it costs you nothing. People in the last 6 months of their lives use a lot of medical services, which means that these medical services are not available for other people. Okay, one of the problems with socialized medicine is you have long queues or long waiting lists. In Canada, which some people say is the model for the U.S. socialized medicine, some of these numbers come from my old employer, the Fraser Institute, when I worked in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. They did a lot of work on this. And what happens is that this is the problem of moral hazard. If the price is zero, there's a great demand for it. People use the service as if it's as if it has a zero price. In Canada, if you are guilty of animal abuse, you can go to jail. And there was this case where a horse had a gallstones, and the veterinarian came out the next day and fixed the horse. The owner of the horse, a woman, also had gallstones, and she went to the hospital to try to get it removed, and she was told she could be on a waiting list, which would take about 18 months. So in other words, she's put in jail for mistreating a horse, and the medical system which mistreats her is not put in jail. So we're treating horses better than people. And the reason horses get taken care of right away is there's no socialized veterinary services or anything like that. So you don't have these gigantic waiting lists.
You should be allowed to vote.
The horses should be allowed to vote, I guess. I don't know. There was this guy, Big Country Reeves. Did anyone ever hear of him? He was a basketball player on the Vancouver team. He wasn't very good. He only had a career of 2 or 3 years in the NBA. He was a white guy. He couldn't jump. But he hurt his ankle. And he was put in the hospital the next day. Just a sports injury. Whereas if any normal person hurt his ankle, it'd take years to be seen by the doctor. And other people get to the head of the line, like politicians and bureaucrats. So it's, Canada says we don't want to have a two-tiered system, God forbid. Well, we do have a two-tiered system in that country. There are the privileged and then the non-privileged. Let me read off some waiting list times. For orthopedics, 25 weeks on average. Plastic surgery, 19 weeks. Ophthalmology, 22 weeks. Gynecology, 13 weeks. Here's one that I can't really pronounce. Maybe you can help me. Otolaryngology. I don't know what that means. Well, okay, if you say so. 14 weeks on that. Urology, 12 weeks. Neurosurgery, 17 weeks. Cardiovascular, 18 weeks. This is a phenomenon not of medicine, but of socialized medicine, that you have waiting lists because the prices are very low. Okay. The reason that it's so expensive is mainly because there are restrictions on entry, supply restrictions. The AMA is the strongest union in the country. It keeps people out. It says in order to increase quality of doctors, but really in order to keep the prices up. Ron Hammaway, who was mentioned as one of Murray Rothbard's friends from the 60s, did a book for the Fraser Institute that I edited called Canadian Medicine, A Study in Restricted Entry, where he actually catches these people with their pants down around their ankles. In the early days when socialized medicine was first inputted, the doctors were saying, there are too many doctors practicing. They're lowering the prices. We've got to keep them out. I mean, it was that blatant. And that's why we need to have restrictions on entry. And the AMA, the American Medical Association, is the same thing. One of the criteria they have is you have to be a citizen to be a doctor. But you don't have to be a citizen to be a physicist or a chemist. Why should you have to be a citizen to be a doctor? Another way of restricting entry is they make the exams in English. And a lot of doctors come over from foreign countries and their English is halting. It's not as good enough to become a doctor. And the argument is, well, if you don't know English, you're not going to be able to give good patient care because the person will complain about a pain in the knee and you'll start examining the stomach and it just wouldn't work. But there are unconscious patients, and an unconscious patient by definition can't speak to you, so you lose nothing by not being able to speak to him. You could at least treat unconscious patients. Secondly, there are patients from the same country as the doctor. So if the doctor comes from Cuba, he could take care of any Spanish-speaking patient. And third, this is why God invented translators. Okay, it'll cost a little more and the patient will have to pay for the translator, but if the patient wants to, why shouldn't the patient be free? Then there's all sorts of medical practices that indicate that what's going on is not for patient care. I have a young cousin who, just a few years ago did his internship, and he says they keep him on for 48 hours in a row. I tell you, when I'm writing, after 4 or 5 hours, my mind turns to paste or something, and I can't do it anymore. Imagine staying up 48 hours and getting any quality writing out of an intellectual. It's hard to believe. Whereas, somebody staying up 48 hours, I wouldn't want them treating me. They block osteopathy, chiropractic, homeopathy, nurse practitioners. Lately, nurse practitioners have been able to get in a little, and physicians' assistants, but the AMA has blocked this to the best they could. They don't testify on malpractice against each other. They circle the wagons. One of the reasons that the AMA restriction is so powerful is that they restrict you before you get the knowledge. You see, if they were to restrict people after they had the medical school knowledge or the medical school training, it would be harder to restrict them, because here's a guy who just went to 4 years of medical school, and on what grounds are you keeping him out? Whereas if they can keep you out before you get into medical school, then things are much better. And in order to get a new medical school approved or to add new students to your present extant medical school, you have to get the permission of the AMA, which is not usually forthcoming. There's a doctor shortage, as shown by the fact that doctors make a lot more money than other people who you'd think by the very sort of thing they do would have enough smarts and enough ability to tolerate blood and guts and gore. For example, people with a PhD in biology. According to the statistics I've got here, doctors make about a little over triple what PhD biologists make. And this is an anomaly because there tends to be in a free market a movement of people around such that you don't get such gigantic differences in salaries for essentially a similar kind of job. Let me prove this to you with the following example. Cows have 1 baby a year, pigs have 10 babies a year, rabbits have 100 babies a year. Will rabbits be more profitable than pigs, and will pigs be more profitable than cows in the free market system? No. Because if rabbits were more profitable than pigs or cows, people would leave cows and enter the rabbit industry until the profits went down. So profits tend to be equal in all fields of endeavor, and how many babies an animal has is irrelevant to that process. Well, so would it be in a free market system. If doctors are making triple or quadruple what biologists are making, there would tend to be a move out of biology and into medicine, thus raising prices in biology and lowering them into medicine until there was some sort of rough equilibration, given that you need the same amount of smarts and other abilities to be in both fields. The fact that it's for many years triple or quadruple shows that there's some sort of restriction on entry. Another problem with medicine is that there's no third party, there are third party payers, there's no bargaining. If you go to buy a car, you'll go to 2 or 3 places to see, and you'll try to get one guy to bid against the other. Whereas in medicine, there's none of this. You don't go to the doctor and say, well, how much will it cost for you to set my wrist? And he says, oh, $1,000. You say, well, I'll check back with you in a couple of weeks, and now you call 4 or 5 other doctors and see what kind of prices they do. There's none of that. So prices tend to escalate for that reason as well. Another problem is on the demand side. With socialized medicine at a very low price, as I say, people tend to misuse it. Suppose we had socialized milk along the same lines as socialized medicine. Right now, when kids have a gunfight, it's a water gunfight. Nobody ever puts milk in the gun because, milk is too expensive. I'm told by experts in the field that milk baths are better than water baths. But very, very few people, except maybe Bill Gates' wife or somebody like that, is going to pour a whole tub of milk and then take a bath in it. But if we had milk for free, and there's an argument to have milk at a very low price because babies need milk and the poor need milk and you can't trust the market to get milk, and there's profit in milk and that profit is evil, so let's have socialized milk. Well, if we had socialized milk, people would misuse milk, or they would use the milk at a lower price. So this is the moral hazard problem. Socialized medicine is a hypochondriac delight. Something hurts, oh, I'll go to the doctor and get him to check it out. I mean, if it costs $200 or $300, you might not be so quick to do it. There are people who don't make friends easily. Nobody wants to talk to them because they're boring. Go to a doctor, the doctor says, oh, what happened? And, pay attention to them for 5 minutes. There are all sorts of abuses of this system based on the artificially low prices that socialized medicine, Medicare, Medicaid, what have you, get you. So if we had a situation where medical practice was put on a free market setting, the prices would be much, much lower than they are now. You wouldn't need to have medical insurance except for catastrophic kinds of things as you do for houses and cars. The problem would pretty much go away. We'd have many more doctors, and that pretty much concludes my discussion of medical economics. So let me call for some questions and discussion.
You didn't mention anything about the response of the market most of the patients are British, Canadians, and Americans and so forth. Right? But my point is, there's, whatever you do in the market to try and prevent supply, there's, reactions other places. And with relatively cheap airfare and so forth, this is obviously a reaction to socialized health.
I'm not familiar with that. If you could email me, give me the specifics of it, I'd love to be able to cite that. I think that's a very important thing. My email, let me give you my email address here. Oh, is it on the things that people, okay, so
yeah.
We all have each other's emails. Okay, well, I'm always writing about this stuff, and this is a very good example of how the market could be working. Guy in the back?
One thing you missed about Dr. Mises is actually very much the gospel. One of the things I noticed is that because they have restrictions on doctors who must be English, we have a lot of people who come in there and they don't speak. I'm from Atlanta, so we have a lot of foreigners who come through it, who most popular with Korean and there's a lot of cases where children have actually died as a result of the doctors having to use English universal translator. They speak English in the phone, and the phone is a patient, but the patient is agonizing English, they're going to use communication problems. And we can't get Spanish doctors, we can't get Korean doctors, because there's English. So the foreign patients die as a result of the AMA restrictions online.
Yeah. I think this is a real tragedy. There are some people that say we should learn many different languages. I personally believe in specialization and division of labor, and not everyone should be multilingual. I remember to get the PhD at Columbia when I entered, you needed 2 languages, and I'm pathetic at languages. I had Spanish all through high school and pretty much 3 years of college, and I still, didn't know much, and the second language would have been impossible. Happily, 2 years after I got there, they allowed you to substitute math or stat for a second language, and I did that. And then on the Spanish exam, I remember what happened is I took the Spanish exam with 2 guys from Mexico, and I passed and they both failed Spanish. And the way that came out is they gave you a Spanish paragraph and an English-Spanish dictionary and all the time you wanted. And eventually I figured out what the paragraph was, and I wrote a perfectly good English paragraph translation. These guys knew what the Spanish was, but they couldn't write an English paragraph to save their lives. So they failed Spanish. and I used to tease them about how much better my Spanish was than theirs. Just very silly. Yes. You had your hand
I
up.
was going to comment about the language thing. To my knowledge, there really are no restrictions in the AMA about language. But I will say that the market share, so to speak, of the AMA amongst American physicians is surprisingly low. It's way below half. It's maybe something like 20 or 30% of the professors and as far as it being a union, they've resisted that appellation for a long time, and within the last several years, they finally came out and said, okay, we may have to function as a doctor's union, but we promise we'll never strike. Well, what good is a union if they're not going to withhold their services? So I think that would actually institute a mass exodus from their membership.
Let me comment as follows. First of all, there's this woman, Jane Orient, who is the head of another medical association. I forget the name of it. She's a libertarian doctor, and I know Mike is a libertarian doctor, and there's one other doctor here, and I think there are several people. It's not as powerful as the AMA, but it's another organization. I don't have the name of it. Another point I wanted to make is that what a strike is really 2 things. It's one, a mass quit, plus a beating up of scabs who cross the picket line. In other words, for libertarians, we favor the right to mass quit. Because if you can't quit as an individual, you're a slave. And if you can quit as an individual, you don't lose your right to quit just because other people are quitting. So a mass quit is always justified. However, what the typical union does is not just mass quit. They don't just say, okay, boss, you're unfair, you're not giving us what we want, we're all leaving. They say that, and they say, and we're going to make sure that you can't hire anyone else. So if the doctors just mass quit, they would have a right to do that, which is roughly what Atlas Shrugged is all about, only it wasn't doctors, but it was a mass quit of businessmen. But what they don't have a right to do is to threaten to prevent other people from getting in there. It sort of is, the analogy would be, you have a right to divorce your wife, but you have no right to get with your friends and surround her house and offer to beat up any other guy she tries to date after you leave her, which is roughly what unions are doing. Yes?
Just a question, a clarifying question. You mentioned that you talked before about insurance. Do you believe that there should not be insurance for people going to get a medical checkup?
No, of course not. I mean, insurance is a viable free market industry, and people should have insurance. I'm just saying that they wouldn't need insurance for ordinary medical things, but for the fact that ordinary medical things are so expensive. And the key is to not get more and more people insurance. The key is to make it less expensive, and the way to make it less expensive is preeminently to have double or triple the number of doctors that we now have by allowing them into medical school. Medical schools typically have, 10 applicants or 15 applicants for every acceptance, which is way higher than PhD biology programs. So if in a free medical market, new medical schools would open up, but they're not allowed to by law, which the AMA has an input into.
Okay. Quick follow-up.
Sure.
PhD biology scholars versus doctors.
Yeah.
Does that take into account that many PhD biologists go on teaching professions with a notably underpaid
Well, no, it doesn't take into that. It does not take that into account. It takes all PhD biologists. But the point is that if there were more doctors, it also takes into account doctors who are professors, who make tons. Sorry. Full-time, part-time, everything. This takes into account everybody. But the point is that the reason that a medical professor makes $1.5 million, typically if you look at the salaries of a university, the top 5 or the top 10 salaries are just physicians. Then comes the football coach, then comes the president of the university. But the physicians, professors' salaries or the others wouldn't be as high if you had many more doctors. And I think that's the crucial key. Young lady next to you?
I was wondering if a part of the idea of consumer advertising is being able to have the knowledge, you know, to see something that's serious, something I know guys with the doctor. And what I've been looking at is information that, you said that it's going to be and stuff like that. So, I'm not going to go to the doctor.
Well, probably I envision in a full free enterprise system you'd have a consumer reports of doctors where they sniffed out every doctor. And you see, it's sort of complicated because one way to get a good record is to not take dangerous cases. You know what I'm saying? Like if I'm a doctor and I only take people that have splinters under their nail or something, and nobody dies under my care, whereas this doctor over here, he takes people that got heart disease, and obviously more of his patients are going to die. So this would have to be done in a very sophisticated way. It's not done now. I think it would be done in a free enterprise system. Yep.
I was interested about the following question, but also, why don't you see a bigger increase in the osteopathic? There's only 14 of them compared to about 120 allopathic schools in the U.S. So why don't you see kind of resources being put towards things? They wouldn't exactly fall under the AMA. They have their own association, and yeah.
I'm not familiar with that as much as I should be. I suspect that they too don't want to have too many homeopaths hogging up all the patients. And also the AMA has been able to marginalize them. But that's something I could do more research on. Yes?
Typically kind of how government help programs such
Well, obviously they do. You know, there are laws against, if a person shows up in a hospital and he's got no money to pay for it, there are laws compelling the hospital to take care of him. Whereas if he shows up at a restaurant with nothing, there are no laws compelling the restaurant to feed him. So obviously this raises the prices for everyone else. I don't know if I fully answered that, but that's all I have to say. Yes, guy in the red hat?
In the case of the guy offering $500,000 for a liver, you know, could it be that he was possibly not into you know, amount of capitalism rather than giving the incentive for somebody having to die? You know, we only have one liver, it's not like giving you know, sort of a...
Well, I don't think it could be fairly counted as an incitement for someone to go grab someone else's liver. Rather, it could be that he wants to get on the list ahead of someone else who would be getting the liver. Right. In other words, there are a certain number of people that die and that leave livers and sign those cards. Only his son was way down on the list, and he wants somebody who's dying to give him the liver instead of to give the list the liver. Well, it could be interpreted that way. I don't know what the interpretation was. Yes?
Before you mentioned about how to reduce the and you mentioned about the losses in the sense that you're not exactly liable. But in the instance of like tobacco, and I know that you use tobacco models in Africa with you know, like sends out warning. I know they do that in America, but they don't do that in Africa. So, in your opinion, do you think you'll be liable in the lawsuit?
No, I think that you know, free speech means that you can say what you want, and you don't have to say what you don't want. So to compel someone to put a warning, you know, if you smoke this, you die, or something like that, is a violation of their free speech rights. I don't think... Now, if they commit fraud, that's a different thing. If they say, look, this cigarette pack will cure whatever ails you, that's fraud. But if they just say, look, here are cigarettes, and they don't say anything else, I don't think that they should be, in a just law situation, convicted of anything, even if it does cause cancer, which is unclear. It must be more complicated, because there are people who don't smoke that get cancer, and the people who smoke every day 3 packs and don't get cancer. So the relationship between the two, while I wouldn't say is non-existent, it's more complicated. But even if it caused it directly, look, rat poison causes death. You know? And I mean, if they market that this is flour and it's rat poison, then they're murderers. But if they just say rat poison, they don't have to say this is dangerous. And they should be free of such lawsuits, and would be in a libertarian society.
Well, on the rat poison, clear warning signs don't keep going to the rat poison continue. And the issue, like, I have with their company is that it's not, it needs to pump in stuff like you just get to something. Or let's say something like heroin is coming up, and you don't necessarily state that and state what that can lead to. Then that is
well, I'm a believer in caveat emptor. Suppose I sold you a grab bag. When I was a kid, they used to have these things called a grab bag. And it was just a paper bag with stuff in it. And, you know, caveat emptor means buyer beware. The buyer has to be clear. You know, you just don't put stuff in a grab bag into your body. And if you do, well, you're helping out the gene pool, I think. But I don't think that people should be liable. I think that fraud is something, to be guilty of fraud, you have to do something. You can't just be innocently selling stuff. It's not caveat vendor, it's caveat emptor in the libertarian society. Yeah, well, I would say that in the market there would be clear labeling, because people wouldn't trust something of a grab bag sort, and they'd have to label it. Now, if they mislabeled it, they would be guilty of fraud. But if they just said there's nicotine in here, they don't have to say it's dangerous to your health, or the Surgeon General warns that this, that, and the other. That's a violation of the free speech rights of the cigarettes people, and it didn't even help them. I mean, guys who smoke and they say, well, this caused cancer, and now I'm suing the tobacco company, even though they had these signs. Well, I mean, we live in a very lawless society. Is there anyone who hasn't asked the question yet? Yes, go ahead.
Do you think cases like this is going to eventual fall, not fall, but there's capitalism, just people don't take responsibility for their actions?
Yeah, I think this undermines capitalism. Absolutely. This is a great danger not only to our health, but to our ideology. Well, we're over 10 o'clock, so thanks for your attention.